Hi, everyone. It is just about, and I am coming to you to share my thoughts and just a little background stories about trying to contextualize this Blasey Ford hearing that's going to happen in about half an hour. Now, first of all, I'll admit I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I really thought that the Republicans would see that it is politically toxic to go ahead with this hearing without doing an investigation, that they're going to see that this is going to blow up in their face. I was wrong. They seem to be absolutely hard-pressed to push on this tactic. I think it's political suicide. I think this is going to blow up in their face. That's what I think. I'm not sure they care, but I want to share some thoughts with you. A lot of these stories, I'll be 50 in November. And so I was coming of age around the same time that Brett Kavanaugh was and Dr. Blasey Ford as well. And so a lot of the things that are going on here sort of conjure up for me certain kinds of memories. And I wanted to share some of those with you today to help give some context as to what's going on and kind of how what does this all mean? So for those of you who do not know, when I was in high school, I was a cheerleader. I know you're shocked by this. And so I spent a lot of time with our high school football team. Back then at Skyline High School in 1984 or 5, we had an excellent football team and we won a whole lot of football games. And being a cheerleader, I got to be part of that inner crowd. I got to be part of the in crew. But I was also incredibly nerdy and awkward. So I was a little bit on the periphery of the in crowd. I got to go to the stuff, but I wasn't the leader. I wasn't in the in crowd. But when I went to high school, I went to a public high school in California, and things were different. We did not have a lot of alcohol at our parties, not at all. In fact, I rarely recall seeing alcohol at our parties. I definitely don't recall seeing drugs. I'm sure they were there, but I did not see them. Our crowd was not about that. In high school, it was all about dancing. It was about dance parties. And we would be in somebody's basement or we would be at somebody's house and we would be dancing, and it was Prince and it was DeBarge and it was all these things, and we were dancing people. And back in high school, there were a few things that happened that were kind of untoward. I remember 2 incidents that impacted me and that have stayed with me that happened when I was in high school. Number one, I remember one time I actually got dragged into the boys' locker room shower after a football practice. And it was terrifying to me because there were all these guys and it was just me, and they were trying to be funny, but it was actually kind of terrorizing. And even though the only thing that happened was that I kind of smacked at him and ran out, it could have happened very differently. But the fact that they kind of manhandled me left an impression. I remembered that. I still remember that. Do I remember what day it was? No. Do I remember what practice it was? No. Do I even remember who all was involved? No. But I do remember that it happened because it scared me. And that adrenaline rush that you get when you are scared is something that sears memories into your psyche. That's the first thing that happened that kind of like stayed with me. The other thing that happened, and there were a lot of good things in high school, there were a lot of bad things, very few bad things, but I remember one particular incident that happened that I will always remember. And that is that we were dancing. In high school, we had regular dancing and then we had slow dancing. I don't know if you guys remember slow dancing, but the slow jams was when you would get, guy would hold you in his arms and you guys would kind of sway together. And you only really wanted to slow dance with guys that you liked. Because you didn't want a guy holding up on you that you didn't like. But I was dancing and we had just won a big football game and all the football players are there. And there was one particular player who I did not find interesting or attractive, but he was always kind of needling me. And because everybody was in high spirits, he asked me to dance. And because I was, yeah, everything's cool, I decided to dance with him. It was a regular dance. But soon that dance came to an end, and he wanted to slow dance with me. And he just kind of grabbed me to start slow dancing. And I will tell you that in that moment, because everybody was in such a good mood, the way I was thinking about it was, I don't want to embarrass this guy. I'm not going to walk off as he tries to slow dance with me. I can slow dance with this guy. It's no big deal. And so I started slow dancing with him. And he's a good, everything's cool. And then out of nowhere, he bends over and he kisses me. And I was like shocked. I was shocked. He put his mouth on my mouth. And I'm standing there like, oh, what do I do? Now, I remember this because at no time prior to that moment, and in fact, in that moment, did I ever have a desire to kiss this guy. I did not want to kiss this guy. So it was a shocking moment to me. And in response to that, I slapped him. No, really, I did. I literally just stopped dancing. And when he got his mouth off of me, I literally slapped him in the middle of the dance floor. And everybody saw it. And it ended up humiliating him. And it kind of humiliated me. But more than anything, that was an instance in high school that I will never forget. Now, I can't tell you what house it was in. I can't tell you who all was at the party, but I can tell you who kissed me. And I can tell you that I slapped him. And after that happened, some people around us started laughing. A couple people talked about it the next day at school or the next week. You know, they kind of needled me about it. And it wasn't something that was traumatic to me in the sense that I was terrified. I wasn't terrified. I was angry, okay? And what I remember about that is that had this man not kissed me unwillingly and I slapped him, if I had that not happened, this was an individual I would have never remembered. Let me rephrase that. I went to my 25-year high school reunion. There were a whole lot of people there, many of whom I did not remember, that I went to class with and I talked with, but later do not remember. But this person I will never forget. I'm 50 years old. I'll be 50 in November. I will never forget this guy. I will never forget his name. I will never forget what he looks like. I will never forget what it felt like, the humiliation, how angry I was. And so the emotion around that event as it occurred seared those details into my mind. Right? He was not a starter on our football team. He was not a star. He wasn't a guy I had a crush on. Had this not happened, I would have never remembered this person. Right? He wasn't a person I had classes with. He was not tight to me. So had this not happened, I would have never remembered this person. But because it did happen, I will always remember this person. Now, this was an unwanted kissing that I handled by slapping him. And in a way, I was kind of treated like a little badass because this guy had a kind of reputation for being handsy. And so it wasn't something that fundamentally hurt me, but it seared in my mind. I cannot imagine how seared in Christine Blasey Ford's mind the experience would have been to have Brett Kavanaugh's mouth on hers, to have his hands on her body, to have him groping her, to have his hand over her mouth. The notion, the mere insinuation that she could somehow be confused by whose mouth it was, not sure who was groping her breasts, she could have confused one white guy with another white guy because all white guys look the same. This is ridiculous. And any woman who has had a personal experience that shocked her, scared her, jarred her, embarrassed her, or humiliated her will tell you that they do not forget who it was. You don't forget that. So this notion is ridiculous. I'm going to leave that there for a moment. Now, my high school experience was very different than my brother's high school experience. Some of you do not know that I have a brother. I do. He's 19 months older than me. Hi, Vincent. I love you. And my brother was living in Washington, D.C. when I was living in Oakland because my parents were divorced. My dad was with the State Department, was Foreign Service officer. When he was not overseas, he was in Washington, D.C. I was with my mom who lived in Oakland, California. My brother and I are 19 months apart. He was one grade above me until I skipped 9th grade. And so by the time we reached high school, he and I were in the same grade. I know, weird, huh? I'm not brilliant. It was just a weird thing. Anyway. So I was in high school at the same time as my brother. We were in the same grade. And from time to time, I would go out and visit my dad and my brother and my stepmom, and I would hang out with my brother. My brother went to a high school called Gonzaga College High School. It is on par with Georgetown Prep as a Catholic private boys' school in Washington, D.C. that is a feeder to the Yales, the Harvards, and the Georgetowns and so forth. My brother was squarely in the same sort of social milieu as Brett Kavanaugh at approximately the same time. Okay? So I actually hung out with my brother in his Gonzaga High School crowd on occasion when I visited. And one of the things that I will remember about the difference between his college experience, his high school experience and mine was that, like I said, my high school did not have alcohol and drugs. Like it just, if it was there, I never saw it. It was just not part of our way of doing things. His high school did. And I remember this very clearly because my brother was sort of associated with the lacrosse team, and he was in the football team at Gonzaga College High School. And somehow he got the key to an apartment of one of the coaches. I don't know how this happened. My brother had kind of an interesting way of maneuvering, but he did. So the first time in my life, when I actually got completely blackout, well, not blackout, but just really, really drunk, was when I was visiting my brother at Gonzaga High School, and he had the key to one of the apartments, and he and 3 or 4 of his buddies had me in an apartment at night drinking. And they were drinking virtually every weekend. Alcohol was a big part of the Gonzaga experience. And it was so weird because these were the most academic, serious, athletic people during the day. But at night, they blew off steam by drinking. I will tell you, I'll never forget this because that was the first time I ever threw up from alcohol. You don't forget that. And what we were drinking was Chivas Regal and apple juice. Only problem was the apple juice was off. It was fermented. So it was Chivas Regal and fermented apple juice. Let me tell you, I've never been so sick in my life. And to this day, I cannot even look at a bottle of Chivas Regal. Anything that says Regal turns my gut. That was a very bad situation I was in. The good news was that my brother was there, and certainly nothing would have happened to me with my brother there. I know that. And these were good friends of his. But I can tell you that drinking like that was normal in that milieu. Like it was. And the guys that were there are now respectable, professional, top of their profession type guys. So there is no correlation. Just because you are really academic doesn't mean you can't also be a really big drinker. In fact, in that social circle, it was extremely common. In fact, I would say it was probably pervasive. Okay, that's what I know about that milieu, Catholic private boys' school of an elite class of people. And yes, my brother did actually go to Yale from Gonzaga. So he was at Yale at the same time that Brett Kavanaugh was. They were not in the same college. And I asked my brother if he ever knew the guy. He said no. So Yale's a big place. There's lots of people. But interestingly enough, that story about drinking and being blotto at 17 or 18 while you were at a prep school in Washington, D.C., that rings very true to me. And the notion that Brett Kavanaugh is now saying that he was a schoolboy and choir boy, and he was athletic and he was academic, and so he was just he was just all good. Well, hey, I met a whole lot of the folks like that who were both athletic and academic and stone cold alcoholics at the same time. Those are not exclusive. They're not exclusive. In fact, for a lot of those people, the way they handled the stress of the competitive environment that they were in, where they had to get great grades and their parents had high expectations from them, and getting into Yale was a sine qua non of life. The way they handled it was drinking. That was the way that they mitigated their stress. And so I know that to be a real possibility. But I want to move forward a little bit to what happened while I was in college. When I got to UC Davis, I had decided that I wanted to be a sports physician for a college football team. Why did I want to do that? I don't really know. I still love football. You all know that. But I just decided that sports medicine was fascinating to me and I wanted to do that. So I was a trainer for my college football team. And if you don't know what a trainer does, a trainer tapes ankles and tapes wrists and takes care of sports injuries. It's a part of a sports medicine team. So our college had a great football team, even though it was Division II, it was a very winning team, and taking care of the football players was something that I did. But one of the rules of thumbs for the female trainers on our staff was don't date the players. Don't flirt with the players, don't date the players, because if you wanted to be taken seriously as a trainer, then you could not become the subject of the rumor mill of the locker room. And if you were kissing on or dating or flirting with these guys, that absolutely would happen. I was a trainer for 3.5 years, or basically 4 football seasons. So I spent a lot of time with my college team's football players, a lot. And because of that, they kind of embraced me into their social circle. Now, many of these guys, these are white guys, mostly, not all, but mostly. Many of them were frat boys, Sigma Nu, SAE, Pi Kappa Alpha. They were all those things. But they were also really smart, academic. They were serious about their studies. They were also, when I knew them, super nice to me. They could not have been nicer to me. They were kind and friendly and funny and respectful. And we had really, really tight friendships. And one of the things that facilitated my later life was my comfort with white men, because I learned how to talk to them and they learned how to talk to me. They were comfortable with me. I was comfortable with them. But here's the bottom line. I did not date them. I did not date these guys. Why? Because I knew what kind of social pressure that would put on me and how I would be talked about if I was put in their mind as a girl you play with rather than a girl you respect. And I think that there was quite a difference in their minds about how they treated those different classes of women. To that end, I will say that I went to a lot of frat parties when I was in college. A lot. Because that's what was going on socially at the time. That's what was up. That was up. So if this was my social circle, which it was, then I did what my social circle did. And I went to a lot of frat parties. And I will tell you that there was a certain kind of pattern to these frat parties. As a female, you walk in the door, they want you there. Girls are always welcome at frat parties. Even girls that aren't popular, they're welcome at frat parties. You walk in, the first thing they do is hand you a beer. In a big old plastic cup, they hand you a beer. And if you say no, within a minute or two, another person will come to you and say, hey, have a drink. I cannot tell you the number of times I got plied with people insisting that I started to drink. Now, of course, at a few parties, I did get drunk. I learned, don't do that. So the way I handled the situation to ensure that I did not end up in a situation I didn't want to be in, the way I handled it was I used to walk around frat parties with a 40-ounce bottle of Old English 800. I don't know if you know what Old English 800 is. It's malt liquor. It's way stronger than beer, right? But it has a bottle that has a little tiny opening at the top so nobody can slip anything in there. And it's the label, Old E, everybody knows you are drinking. You are drinking. So when they see you drinking something so potent, they leave you alone. So my trick to frat parties when I was in college was to walk around with a half-empty bottle of Old E. And I stopped getting plied with drinks. They just stopped giving them to me because I already had what they would consider an inebriating beverage. It was a trick because I knew that it was never going to be in my positive interest to be blotto at a frat party. I just knew that was not good. Now, I want to make clear, I don't know what happened at all of those parties, but I know the circumstances were ripe for bad things to happen to girls in those parties. I knew that. Just like Julie Switek went to parties and knew bad things were happening and she went anyway. So I know Lindsey Graham said, well, why did you keep going to those parties? And the answer, Senator Graham, is because that was your social network at the time. That's what was happening. And you don't want to be socially isolated, right? These were the people I hung out with. These are people I knew, I trusted. And if I saw bad things happening, at the time, the way I thought about it was, well, just don't let that happen to me. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that when I saw things that I thought were scary and sketchy and not good, rather than say, I need to be out of this situation altogether, I said, I need to manage myself to make sure it doesn't happen. Over time, I also started to look out for the other women at the house more carefully. When I saw girls that were fall over drunk, I'd be the one to tell their little sorority sisters to get her out of here, right? I'd be the one to do that because I knew that was a bad situation. But did I stop going to the parties? No, I was having fun and I was okay. I'm sorry to say that I wasn't more assertive than I should have been, because obviously I didn't know better back then. But it should not surprise you that not long after I graduated, one of those fraternities was kicked off of campus for a sexual assault situation. And not long after that, one of the other ones that I hung out with got kicked off campus for precisely the same thing. So If you went to a college that had a frat party drinking scene, you can completely understand how the things that went down that these accusers are saying could go down exactly the way they said. You can completely understand that. I can completely understand it. It rings 100% true to me. As a woman who can remember when somebody got untoward with me and will never forget it, and it was certainly not as traumatic as what Dr. Ford went through, I can tell you that I know those memories are seared. And you know what? If you told me today that it was some other guy who kissed me, I would tell you, hell no. I would tell you I know exactly who he is. I know exactly what he looks like. I can even remember what cologne he was wearing. So don't tell me that I'm confused. That's an utter disrespect. It is an utter dismissal and a disrespect, and it's totally wrong. So that's number one. Number two, when you talk about total drunk boy behavior, just because you are smart and just because you are athletic and academically oriented does not mean that you are not also a stone cold alcoholic, blotto drinking asshole when you get drunk. Because I watched that behavior many times. Guys who got completely out of hand when they got drunk. In fact, they had nicknames. They had buddies at the party who would keep an eye on them because everybody knew they got out of hand when they got drunk. They got ridiculous when they got out of drunk. Everybody knew that. So to tell me that there's no way in hell that Brett Kavanaugh was that kind of dude, he seems to me precisely that kind of dude. Precisely that kind of dude. The last thing I will leave with you with is this. Conspiracies are extremely difficult to pull off. In fact, without tight correlation and connection between people, they're virtually impossible. Okay? To have lies coordinated, co-signed, verified, and made to look a certain way, it's virtually impossible between people who do not know each other intimately, right? So if there was a conspiracy between Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, that makes sense. They were tightly connected. A conspiracy between Dr. Blasey Ford and Julie Swidnick? Absolutely not. These women don't know each other at all. Right? And furthermore, I will say this. When it comes to credibility, and I'm speaking as a lawyer here, when you have to do, if it's a he said, she said, which is what the GOP is trying to set up, a situation where it's her word against his, we take his, and they don't allow for the examination of anything that will make his story or her story seem more plausible. They don't want any evidence to come in to weight the stories. That's an intentional miscarriage of justice. That is an intentional evasion of truth rather than the seeking of truth. Because every story takes place in a context. And it is the details of the context that make it more and or less credible. It is the details of the context that make a person's story more and or less credible. Those details include who was there, who saw it, who, whether there's corroboration based on circumstantial evidence, whether there's a personal trauma that makes that memory more credible and or less credible, whatever. There are all kinds of things. But one thing I will tell you, that when it comes right down to it, if you have to make a decision between he said and she said, and you have to decide who's lying, then ask yourself a very simple question. Who has something to gain by lying? That's what you should ask yourself in this circumstance. Who has something of value to gain by lying? And the answer to that question is unequivocally Brett Kavanaugh. That's it for today. Have a good one.